And we are live. Hello, everyone. This is My Two Cents, and got a bit of a special stream for you this week. Don't get me wrong, this is going to be our weekly update on all things current events, COVID, and that stuff. But this is also a celebration stream because thanks to all of your support, I have surpassed 6,000 subscribers. Well, it's been a while since we had a milestone stream, so I just want to say thank you to everyone who has supported my work of making videos over the past 3 years. And I look forward to making more awesome content moving here in the future. So thank you very much, and let's do what we can. I appreciate all those of you who support the channel financially or just by sharing my videos so that we keep growing. And we'll have some more. We'll talk about some more about that later. But first things first, let's talk about all the craziness that is going on in the world. Of course, the first thing being the U.S. national debt. Taking a look at the usdebtclock.org, the national debt is currently $26,698,497,000,000. And as always, once you get to that hundreds of thousands mark, it's going up too fast to even bother trying to say. The Fed's balance sheet is has again topped $7 trillion. It's been floating right around $7 trillion. Oh, and we've not yet seen any of the drastic increases that we saw since, at least initially back in the March-April timeframe. But that brings us right into our first news story for this week. Now, I'm sure those of you that have been following the mainstream media all week have probably been hearing a lot about the situation in Kenosha, Wisconsin, Kyle Rittenhouse, and, of course, the Republican National Convention and all that stuff that's going on, which... plenty to talk about there, but I bet most of you have not heard anything about what happened this Thursday, and that has to do exactly with the Federal Reserve, which we talk about so much on this channel. The Federal Reserve Chairman on Thursday announced that the Fed is going to essentially be abandoning its long-standing policy of ensuring that inflation does not rise above 2% annually and allow inflation to rise above 2%. The committee the committee seeks to achieve inflation that averages 2% over time and therefore judges that following periods when inflation has been running persistently below 2%, appropriate monetary policy will likely aim to achieve inflation moderately above 2% for some time, the new policy framework says. Now, that doesn't sound too crazy. I mean, to the average person reading that, who doesn't understand what's really going on, basically what they hear is, okay, the Fed usually keeps inflation no greater than 2%. 2% is considered ideal, and they don't want it to rise above that. But, you know, it's an emergency. So all they're saying is we're just going to let it rise above inflation a little bit for a little bit of time. That's not what's going on. Basically, the Fed is admitting that they have implicitly admitting they have lost their ability to control inflation. They have created so much money over the past few months. And now they pretty much, if they actually try to stop inflation, they're going to pop the bubble and collapse the economy. And since no one wants to be the one who's responsible for doing that, they're saying, okay, I guess we'll just let inflation run wild. And if my prediction, it's going to go a little bit above 2%. It's going to go a little bit above 3%, and then I don't know exactly what the formal trigger will be, but once it rises to a certain level, people are going to panic, and that's when you're going to see the hyperinflation take place.
Oh, yeah.
Well, what happened, I remember last bubble burst was in 2004 when the collapse of the housing bubble was first beginning.
I believe you mean 2008.
I actually do mean 2004, and you'll see why shortly. Because that's when the Fed chairman, I believe it was Greenspan at the time, I could be wrong, decided to increase the interest rate from 1%, which had been a record low at the time, and started to gradually shift it upwards all the way to 5% in 2008. Now, of course, officially, the housing crash burst in 2008. However, things were starting to fall apart as early as February 2007. But you saw very much a similar case where the gravy train of the housing bubble was propped up entirely on low interest rates persistent since 2001, which began as a way to basically inflate the U.S. economy out of the dot-com bubble bursting. So Yeah, they basically followed what's his name, Paul Krugman's advice to inflate a housing bubble to get us out of the .com bubble, and you can see that that's largely what happened. And I'm going to be seeing similar things here. Like you say that the Federal Reserve is increasing its interest rate. I mean, I haven't been following interest rates, so I'm actually not sure.
The discount rate has not gone. No, they have not raised the discount rate. Essentially, raising the discount, if they raise the discount rate or essentially make it more expensive to borrow money so that people stop borrowing money, they would do so in an effort to curb inflation. When the Fed wants to stimulate economic growth, it lowers the discount rate, lowers the rate at which banks can borrow money from the Fed, money that they create into thin air. This, of course, increases the money supply, lowering the interest rate that the average person can borrow money for, making loans cheaper. More people go into debt, and it spurs an economic expansion. Of course, since it's being created by new money that doesn't actually represent real resources in the economy, soon prices rise to compensate for the fact that there's actually no more wealth in the economy than there was before, and a recession follows to correct the problem. But what the Fed has been doing all these years is, in order to prevent that recession from coming, instead they print even more money to allow people to take out more loans to pay off the previous loans, and this just keeps going and going. Of course, inflation is a tax in as much as when the government creates new money, the value of everyone else's money goes down, and it's a regressive tax in as much as it disproportionately affects the people with the smallest amounts of money. And before I continue, just quickly, Pumpkin Row, thank you very much for the super chat.
How old are you?
Well, it's not my real birthday, but channel birthday anyways.
Okay.
It's been 3 years.
I guess what I was yeah, sorry. I guess what I was asking for clarification is this moving away from 2%? Are they trying to raise or lower the interest rate? And they're just indicating like the 0.25% interest rate is going to be kept the same for the foreseeable future.
They're trying to either keep the discount rate the same or lower it even further.
Well, I mean, the only way it can possibly go lower is if they're like doing marginal shifts, like from 2.25 to 0.2 or 0.1.
Or even negative interest rates, which they've still said they don't intend to do that, but I think sooner or later they're going to have to.
Well, I mean, if they were fixated on 2% in the first place, I can already tell you what they're going to do. The reason that they wanted a 2% in the first place is because according to the mathematical models of modern monetary theory or MMT, 2% is the ideal interest rate. Now, MMT is basically the latest evolution of neo-Keynesianism, and they've decided to move away from the label of Keynesianism in general because it's gotten terrible publicity for all the right reasons, mind you. But they basically taken on a lot of the ideas. 2%, they figure, gives them enough inflationary room to inflate any political economy out of its debt, but also not increasing the monetary supply too much such that it causes radical, out-of-control price inflation, which generally is not something that they find ideal. And if you know Keynesian economics, you know that while they do recognize it as a problem, they don't think it's as big of a problem of most other schools of economics, least of all Austrianism. But the point about bringing that up is that they won't go into negative interest rates until they do something very specific. And what they're going to do that's very specific is start to tax pensions. What they're going to do is require 401ks, Roth IRAs, any sort of financial instruments that people use to save for retirement. Once they get their greedy hands into that, basically requiring a portion of those funds to be put into institutions or into forms or into financial assets that are taxable, that's when you're going to see negative interest rates. That's what modern monetary theory calls for.
Excellent explanation there, Filthy.
I hope I was clear at least, because this requires a lot of breaking through some financial jargon.
Definitely. Of course, in principle, it's not that complicated. The jargon is really to keep the public under the belief that it's so complicated that the average person can't really figure out what's going on, and you have to trust the experts to tell you what the appropriate thing to do is.
Mm-hmm. Basically, your retirement savings are going to be taxed, and when that happens, negative interest rates.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Now, what is interesting is I think once you come to understand what inflation really is, an expansion of the monetary supply in which when the government creates more money is so that they can spend it first before the inflation takes place, and the value of everyone else's money goes down, necessarily meaning that the people with the smallest amounts of money suffer the most. When you understand that, I think anyone can see 2% inflation is not the optimal inflation rate. 0% inflation is the optimal inflation rate. It's only when they keep inflation at a low enough level that the average person doesn't notice it's happening that they can get away with it. Because obviously when hyperinflation takes place, when prices are doubling within a month at a time, the average person at that point, the game's up. They realize the currency is worthless and nothing the state can do is going to convince them otherwise. It's only if they can keep it low enough that they can, as Keynes himself put it, siphon away the wealth of a nation such that only one man in a million will detect the theft, or not one man in a million will detect the theft. I believe I'm paraphrasing that quote. But essentially, Keynes himself admitted that inflation is siphoning away the wealth of the country dishonestly, such that the average person doesn't even realize it. But central banks around the world, those that have not already gone under, are themselves trying to acquire gold. The price of gold, of course, took a sharp upturn when the Fed announced this, something the average person probably didn't see, but that did in fact occur. And I mean, like I said, like my initial statement, the fact that the Fed is admitting this is basically showing they've lost control. If they could, they'd keep inflation at 2%, but they know if they try to at this point, they're going to collapse. They will prick the bubble, and this is all going to come crashing down.
I mean, as I said multiple times, everything the government does nowadays is in the interest of themselves, not only maintaining but increasing their power. But since they can't do that anymore, their motivation is entirely based on the desire to keep the lights on for another 5 minutes. And just to respond to something Adam No Eve said in the comments, doesn't Joe Biden want to reform pensions and 401ks like that? Yeah, he did say he wanted to. I mean, I'll admit I'm not privy to his specific policy proposals, but it does make sense that he would want to do that. And I imagine that since he's not cognizant himself, he's probably got people whispering in his ear to tell him to say this, specifically with the intention of facilitating negative interest rates, which, I mean, I think we talked about that before in the past, where if a central bank needs to use negative interest rates specifically to prop up the economy, you don't really have much of an economy left, do you?
Nope. And really, I mean, the economy, the weakness of the economy is evident to those that understand what's going on. They can try to keep tricking people into believing it's strong. And of course, Donald Trump is banking on that to try to get reelected. Joe Biden would like to see it collapse, I think, so that he can try to use that as part of his narrative about why he should be elected. But the problem is once the dollar system itself collapses, it ain't going to matter who wins the election. The whole financial system is going to come crashing down.
Honestly, does anyone here think we're going to make it to the election? I mean, do you think we're going to see the 2020 elections?
Yes.
It's seeming less and less likely the more we go into this. Because,
yes. I think we're definitely going to see it. Now, is the collapse of the economy accelerating? Certainly. Is it going to occur before the 2020 election or before November 3rd? Possibly. I'm not going to say that for certain, but I do know one thing, and I've been telling people both online and in real life about this a bit. I think the 2020 and possibly the 2024 election will be the last elections of consequence in the United States.
Yeah.
I mean, I honestly do believe, and I was telling people this as well, that there will still be presidential elections afterwards, 2028, 2032, and will probably continue probably into the 50s or 60s. The thing is, though, it's like who the president in the year 2040 is going to be as important as who the last winner of America's Got Talent was. It'll be a trivial matter. that will have no significance in anyone's actual day-to-day life. It's basically just going to be a bunch of, all the boomers will be elsewhere. So it'll probably be just a bunch of Gen Xers playing, or just Gen Xers cosplaying.
And it's interesting you should say that. It makes me think of a clip from The Hill I was watching earlier this week, where both the commentators on that network were discussing several various polls going into the 2020 election, and about voters being asked about this poll was not specifically who you're going to vote for, but whether or not you're going to vote at all. And what they stated is several notable polls, Rasmussen, which was one of them, I don't remember the others, said that the amount of people who say they aren't voting or they will vote but they don't care has gone up significantly this time around, especially among the lowest income in society. And when asked why people are not voting or they don't care, the answer was because we've been voting for years and we've never seen our situation actually change.
Yeah, there you go.
And I thought, isn't that enlightening in that, because the truth is you don't nothing really fundamentally changes. Little things change here or there, but picking between Republicans and Democrats is like, to borrow an example Esso used in one of his videos, it's like picking between Fruity Pebbles and Captain Crunch. They're both, they taste a little different, but they're both made by the same company. Mm-hmm. And especially the people on the lowest end of people with the lowest incomes, or the lowest quality of life, as far as the United States goes, have come to recognize at this point every president who gets elected, the Republicans, the Democrats, when they control the House or control the Senate, they always promise, this time I'm going to pull you out of your horrible situation, and every time our situation gets worse. So right now, like going into the 2020 election, the Republicans and Democrats are fighting over the votes of what remains of the middle class, and of course the wealthy to-do class. But the people, the very group of people that that both parties depend on in their narrative, like I'm going to help. Of course, both parties are trying to create a narrative about how they and their party platform is going to be the one that's going to lift the poor, the worst off among us, out of their dire situation. That very group of people no longer cares because they finally realize it isn't true.
It's about freaking time. What happened in 2016 when Trump was able to court the Rust Belt, which traditionally voted Democrat, into voting for him by promising to bring those factories back? He brought back maybe like 2 or 3 factories, maybe. And fundamentally, the exploitation of those communities by the state has not changed at all. They're still being taxed. They're still impoverished. There's still all the economic protectionism that Trump has not only promised but implemented has made those situations a lot worse, and has made trade with the United States significantly more unprofitable, putting even more people out of work.
Yeah, so, I believe it was Ryan McMacken at the Mises Institute published an article that broke it down. And basically, for every one job that was, quote unquote, saved by Trump's tariffs, an additional 16 jobs were lost in other sectors of the economy.
That seems about right.
I bet you anything he tries to write on that, though, saying, well, I at least brought 2 or 3 of the factories back. Didn't I do just a great job? I should be president in 2020. Vote for me. I'll bet you he's going to write on that, though. Here's what he's going to do. He's going to do the same thing that the gun control people do, which is, if we can just save one job, if we can just save one job from being outsourced to China, it'll be worth it. Yeah.
China. Sorry, I'm contractually obligated to.
Of course. So the bottom line is we have yet another warning factor. The price of gold continues to rise. Cryptos are doing pretty good. Gold, precious metal mining companies are doing pretty good. If you haven't been convinced at this point, you need to get your savings out of US dollars and get it into something worthwhile, be that precious metals, cryptos, or heck, if nothing else, start stocking up on canned food, bullets, and guns, because those are things you're going to need.
That stuff's going to be worth its weight in gold, honestly. And actual gold is going to be worth quite a bit as well. Now, gold is, of course, pretty expensive, but there's no reason you can't get silver. And silver is, last I checked, worth $27 an ounce, which is still a lot more expensive than it used to be. I mean, I made a crap ton of bank on silver, but you can still get quite a bit of that. Just don't think of them as like investments. Think of them as a form of saving. You just transfer your savings into another asset. And quite frankly, considering how well those have been doing in just this year alone, it's really going to be hard to go wrong there.
I might have also mentioned this at an earlier point when we were talking about this, but bullets and canned food are good things, but also stocking up on stuff like diesel fuel, potassium iodide, and penicillin also will help. And you can actually get cheap penicillin from pet stores in the form of amoxicillin. It's pretty much the exact same thing, and it's very super cheap. And those are also things you're going to want to stock up on because they will be worth more than gold, honest to God. And also, if you can, stock up on rock salt and even just regular salt because I mean, when the time comes, if you can't get a hold of precious metals, that could also be traded as a form of currency too. And it worked for the Romans.
I mean, the Romans paid their soldiers with salt, and for a time being, it was used to back currency. So, yeah, having certain foods or having certain items that you could trade in or you could barter with is also going to be tremendously useful.
All right. Well, we could talk about that for the entire stream, but I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next thing I want to talk about. Now, this article, Filthy, sent in. It's from Zero Hedge, written by Tyler Durden. Who all in the chat? You can comment. I'm sure most of you have seen the classic film Footloose, starring Kevin Bacon, where he plays the big city boy who comes to a small country town ruled with an iron fist by the local reverend, where dancing isn't allowed. But Kevin Bacon, of course, being the awesome big city dancer he is, shakes that town up, cuts Footloose, and before you know it, he's banging the pastor's daughter and having an awesome dance party. Well, Footloose, ladies and gentlemen, has come to life. The title of this article is Footloose Comes to Life in New York. Governor Cuomo bans dancing. At the beginning of the article, it says, no, this is not a joke. As reported by Syracuse.com, the state of New York has now, in a further effort to quell the spread of the coronavirus, there is no dancing allowed in New York's bars, restaurants, even at a wedding reception, according to New York State's Liquor Authority.
You gave a pretty good summary of the Footloose movie. However, I would add one thing. And that what's going on in New York is kind of Footloose in reverse. If you recall, the Kevin Bacon character came from a big city where went to a small country where dancing's not allowed. Now dancing is not allowed in the big city. I mean, I know this affects the entire state, but let's be honest. When people think of New York, they think of New York City.
Exactly.
But it's kind of hilarious, and it's also worth mentioning that he banned comedy shows as well. Now, this is presented on the basis that it prevents the spread of coronavirus, which we're going to be talking about again very shortly. And yes, Neko, we know you don't know what Footloose is. Calm down. But anyways, so what's going on here is that, well, Governor Cuomo is demonstrating one of the key facets of the totalitarian mindset, where you are not allowed to have dancing. You're not allowed to laugh at comedy shows. You're not allowed to do any of the things that, present joy and community in your life. You have to just stay at home, stay enclosed like a good little boy. And that's basically what your life is going to be like.
Basically, New York is becoming V for Vendetta.
It's because Cuomo is doing his best impression of the Nose Fire Party.
Well, I would just love to say, for all the violent non-protests that are taking place around the country, there is one kind of protest I'd love to see. People of New York take to the streets, start blasting the song Footloose and doing some awesome dance moves.
Flash mobs everywhere, on every corner.
All right. Well, probably that's pretty much all we have to say about that.
And there's really not much to say except that it just the sphere of acceptable behavior is continually shrinking, and this is entirely a methodology by which opportunistic priests of statism can be used to quell more individual actions and individual thinking.
Mm-hmm. So this next article also comes from Zero Hedge, and I think it is worth discussing, especially in light of the fact that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have made one of their key campaign promises. They are going to institute a nationwide mask mandate where you must even wear your mask outside. They've not really said how they intend to enforce this, but along with Fauci, who went from don't wear a mask, it doesn't help, to you better wear a mask or else. And of course, Biden and Harris have jumped on the bandwagon. Now, again, reported at Zero Hedge, written by Tyler Durden. A study carried out by psychologists from Warwick Business School in the United Kingdom has found that wearing a face mask significantly increases carelessness where personal hygiene is concerned and causes people to basically ignore social distancing. Now, I do want to, so for a minute, I'm going to table the question of coronavirus. How deadly is it? We've discussed that. And of course, all the misinformation that has gone into that. But let's just talk about basic being healthy. I think you ought to know at this point that not touching your face, washing your hands regularly, and not touching your face is one of the best ways to stay healthy, whether you're worried about catching the common cold, coronavirus, the flu, or whatever else. Basically, what this study is saying, and that masks, a mask doesn't really keep you safe from contracting viruses. It might, if you are sick, wearing a mask might help prevent you from spreading it so easily to everyone else. But wearing a mask, generally speaking, does not help you stay healthy. And in fact, if you're wearing your mask improperly and constantly having to readjust it on your face, you're bringing your hands toward your face and increasing the likelihood that you're going to touch your face and transfer germs on your hand to into your body. So what the study is essentially saying is, given these realities and everyone being told wear a mask, wear a mask, wear a mask, the constant wearing of mask is actually causing people's personal hygiene habits to go down, not up, increasing the likelihood that they're going to get sick, whether that be coronavirus or the common cold or whatever.
And this is actually pretty consistent with things I've talked about before that we've seen before. Like, just not only in the sense that people, when they feel wearing a mask, get a false sense of security, therefore they won't do the social distancing that people, or that our divine overlords have decided that is in our best interests. But you can also see how other mandates create a false sense of security as well. Mm-hmm. For example, in traffic, I'm pretty sure you've heard of studies where speed limits are removed from highways and traffic accidents actually go down because now people are more conscientious about the pace of traffic.
Yeah.
And as a result, they'll typically take more cautious steps to ensure their own safety rather than just simply allowing the speed limit to determine how safe they're going to be. And I don't know how often you guys drive, but I know that around me, there's like this one road that's like really close to my house where the speed limit changes so frequently and abruptly that you can't really follow it. It'll go from 20 to 40 to 50 to 30 in just like a span of 1,000 feet. It's really strange. But the people who are required to be made safe through mandates are going to experience a false sense of security and ignore the things that actually would keep them safe voluntarily. I remember there was also some intersection in Paris, France, that was notorious for car accidents. And I don't know if you guys heard about this, but what they did was they tried this experimental idea of removing the stoplights. And this was like an extremely busy intersection. And what happened is that, accidents went down. In fact, they went down significantly.
Oh, nice.
So much so that the place has actually become like one of the safest intersections in the entire city. I may not be remembering exactly where it is. I know it's European somewhere. And if you like watch live videos of it, you'll see like cars weaving in and around each other. It looks like they're inches away from having an accident, but an accident never actually materializes. It's almost magical. And it happens entirely through just individuals taking measures to ensure that their car doesn't sustain thousands of euros in damage, which is naturally not going to be in anyone's interest. But it showcases exactly what I'm talking about. Now, will people actually follow the science, as they like to say, and stop these ridiculous mask mandates that don't actually keep people safe and instead put them into a false sense of security that actually makes them less safe? No, of course not. Because as JT Armitage suggested in the comments in regards to speed limits and having speed traps, it's in the state's interest to keep people wearing masks so that when people aren't wearing masks, they can fine them for it. And I'm pretty sure I've talked about before on this stream in the past about how lots of state and local governments in the United States anyway, I'm sure it's the same thing in Europe, that rely heavily on things like fines and court fees to be able to sustain the funding of their government.
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, in Missouri, after when the whole debacle with what Michael Brown and the hands up, don't shoot, of course, it turned out that hands up, don't shoot never occurred. And Michael Brown did, in fact, assault the police officer before he was shot in self-defense. But nonetheless, there were studies done for the police department following that shooting, looking for corruption or improper policies. And I know that study, like many others that had done it, have been conducted, have concluded that police departments are actually telling their officers to write more tickets because the state depends, doesn't just want additional funding, absolutely depends on the collection of fines in order to fund itself.
And that's the same thing you're going to see with the coronavirus mask mandates. I think that's a big chunk of the motivation behind getting those out there, just to get more funding for their predatory police departments.
Of course, because we've already seen how many cities have gone are in fact going bankrupt, saying they need more federal funding in order to even operate.
And that's one of the reasons that I think that this is primarily that you saw a lot of what was it called? You saw a lot of police departments being defunded following the George Floyd riots, not because they actually cared about what the people think, because they don't. It's because they were trying to save money. They're trying to cut programs. I'm pretty sure I mentioned this on the stream previously as well. And you also saw this corresponding with teachers unions protesting because they were facing severe budget cuts and other stuff like that. Even though, let's be honest, the George Floyd rioters were not talking about our schools are overfunded, defund schools. I'd love for them to do that, but I mean, let's be honest, that's not what they were doing. So why they would do that wouldn't make any sense, except from the perspective that they're doing that to save money.
In order to be a good politician, you need to be able to come up with a plausible excuse for why you're for what you're doing without letting on to the people why you're really doing it. Just take the Iraq War, for example. Saddam Hussein is threatening the petrodollar. We got to take him out. So what do? We create a narrative where he's creating nuclear weapons and we got to take him out or else the whole world's going to drown in radiation.
Mm-hmm.
Even though, Saddam Hussein did have weapons of mass destruction. However, what defines a weapon of mass destruction? That was never clarified. Because if you drop a bomb on someone, just a regular conventional explosive, and it's filled with some chemical agent that you can probably get just by having access to a pool or a pool maintenance thing. You get chlorine, stick that in a bomb, suddenly you have a chemical weapon. A chemical weapon is a weapon of mass destruction.
Mm-hmm. And even then, they were the WMDs that we sold him back in the 80s, pretty much. So, there's also that.
Yeah, that's also the case, but it's just deception piled on top of deception on top of deception. It's
Never underestimate the ability of the state to come up with a plausible excuse for why they're doing what they're doing.
Exactly.
It's pretty sickening.
And it's like, well, and that's my point though. It's like, we create these proxy terrorist organizations or these proxy groups that become terrorist organizations that become terroristic in their designs and that even become totalitarian states like with Saddam Hussein. Because back in the 1980s, America absolutely loved Saddam Hussein and supported his regime. And then all of a sudden, like 20 years later or 25 years later, oh, now we want to take him out. Now we need to go after him. It's like, people, don't fall for the distractions. Don't fall for the distractions. That's how Al-Qaeda was created. That's how ISIS was created, is that we made them. We literally created them, and they were made to literally be distractions and diversions from what's really going on. And it's all bullshit. It's like, don't buy the lies.
Mm-hmm. All right, so next article, got a lot of them coming from Zero Hedge here. This one has to do with COVID-19 death count, specifically in Palm Beach County. Now, it's been several weeks at this point, but we talked on a previous stream about how hospitals in the U.S. have a direct incentive to report as many deaths as the result of COVID-19 as possible. Reason being, under the current COVID Relief Act, hospitals are entitled to more federal funding the more patients they have die as a result of COVID-19. So medical examiners are directly incentivized to, if there are multiple likely causes of death, or they're in any way unsure, fudge whatever you can to make it look like this person died of COVID-19 so that we can get some more funding. Well, as it turns out, an analysis of the deaths in Palm Beach County medical records late last month revealed that most of the county's COVID-19 deaths cannot be attributed to COVID-19 alone. Quoting from the article by Tyler Durden, many of the deaths involved comorbidity like diabetes, cardiovascular diseases, dementia, and more. The investigation spans 658 of the county's so-called COVID deaths. Investigators found that out of 658 cases, just 86 listed COVID-19 pneumonia without contributing causes, such as for example, one woman who was 94 years old had type 2 diabetes, atrial fibrillation, and congestive heart failure, had her cause of death listed as acute respiratory failure and COVID-19 pneumonia.
Basically,
I'll say that one more time.
Basically, she had a heart attack, and then she was listed as a COVID-19 death.
Yep.
That's that's kind of exactly what we were talking about, wasn't it? Where hospitals are incentivized to list anyone having anything resembling a COVID-19 infection as a COVID-19 death. You have, for example, George Floyd himself, who either died from a fentanyl overdose or was strangled to death by, what's his name, the cockroach officer, who was listed as a COVID-19 death because apparently his remains tested as positive for COVID-19. But and you also had that guy in Florida man who died in a motorcycle accident, and he was listed as a COVID-19 death as well. Now, we were talking about these stories before. We had no idea what the actual percentage of cases this would actually be. I kind of imagine it would be like 10 to 15% of people who were listed as COVID-19 deaths actually being COVID-19, but it turns out that number of actual COVID-19 deaths is significantly lower than we anticipated. Now, there are multiple reasons that they would want to do this. Mostly because they're able to report it on the news. You have the mainstream media, corporate media wanting to scare you, not only creates a direct financial incentive for them to do so because, well, if people are scared, people are going to be more likely to check the news, check what's going on, try to stay up to date, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And if people are doing that, it means increased ratings, which means greater ad revenue. They have a direct incentive to do so. In addition, the state has a direct incentive to get people scared because it causes them to accept any sort of police state totalitarian measure that's pitched on the premise of keeping people safe. Does it actually keep people safe? No, of course not. It was never designed to. But the important thing is that people feel safe. And as we know from SJWs, feels over reals. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, this is Palm Beach, California. Sure, that's a pretty big place, but that's not exactly representative of the entire country. Well, hold your horses, because like literally 5 minutes before the stream started, I got sent a tweet which released a study, or not, I don't know if it was a study or not, but basically just this thing released by the CDC where they admit that only 6% of all the 153,504 deaths recorded as being COVID deaths actually died from COVID. So 94% of those people had, and the overwhelming were of very advanced age. This comes from the CDC, of course. And you can see very, very clearly that the state was deliberately inflating the numbers specifically to scare people. If you take this 6% figure into account, what we've had so far in the United States, which, by the way, has a population of 350 million people and approximately 3 million coronavirus cases so far, out of 3 million, only 9,210 have died. 9,210 deaths. That's less than swine flu from, 2008?
Yeah.
2009, something like that.
Yeah, I remember being in government school when that was happening, and we were just making an absolute mockery of how, like, me and other students were making an absolute mockery out of how freaked out some people seem to be about this, because we didn't know anyone who got sick. Nobody knew anyone who knew anyone that got sick. It was a thing that wasn't really happening. We were kind of just laughing at how overblown the media seemed to be making it. Now we have a thing that, I mean, nobody's denying that coronavirus actually is hurting people. Nobody's denying that at all. However, we can see just how horrendously it's being overblown. And as it turns out, it being overblown was significantly more, significant than I originally anticipated. This is a nothing burger. This is weak. This doesn't even qualify as the flu, because the flu kills like tens of thousands of people every year. This hasn't even gotten to 10,000 yet.
Nope.
And it's been like, what? Like, we're at August now. This has been going on for 6 months. This is pathetic. This is the worst epidemic I've ever seen. Certainly the most organized and totalitarian response I've seen, as well as a fantastic propaganda piece by the state. I mean, the extent to which they've successfully scared everyone into going along with their own enslavement is nothing short of spectacular. However, in terms of the disaster that we're supposed to be absolutely terrified of, I think more and more time goes on, more and more people can see this themselves in their own lives.
I know. It's all about control. It's not about protecting people from a virus. It's all about control.
I mean, it was always about control. That was the thing from the very beginning. It's just that the only thing that's unique now is that the state knows how to capitalize on this kind of thing and exploit it to grant itself as much power as it desires.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you guys watched the Republican and Democrat party conventions.
Yeah, I try to stay away from that stuff as much as I can. I don't know.
Can't say I watched them. I hit the highlights the morning after.
I watched them, and I mean, it's a usual. It's kind of interesting because you can at least see like what their narrative, what the state narrative is going to be, what they're going to be running on, and of course, you see the usual, like the Republicans were trying to scaremonger people about the evil, scary anarchists that want to destroy our society. Meanwhile, the Democrats are referring to them as loving, civil, peaceful protesters. All the while, everyone is continuously ignoring all the legislation enforcers who are found to be infiltrating the protests and deliberately causing provocations. Everybody's ignoring that. But it's funny, like how often they talk about COVID-19 and all the great and strong measures they're going to do to stop this, to get a vaccine out as quickly as possible. Don't take the vaccine, by the way.
No kidding. And honestly, I'm just going to say this. I really wish they'd stop calling the protesters and members of Antifa anarchists. They're not anarchists. We are anarchists, okay? We actually hold to the principles stated in the definition of anarchism. They are not anarchists. There's nothing anarchist about their organizations, and I really, really wish they would stop saying that about them, because it's almost even kind of triggering for me to hear them refer to them as anarchists, given that they're pretty much the antithesis of everything that is anarchistic. So just putting that out there. God.
I mean, they're not anarchists. They're edgy Democrats.
Yeah, exactly.
I can see why.
They say we're going to get rid of the government, replace it with something that is exactly the same as government. We call it something different. Therefore, we're anarchists.
I mean, what they're going to do is they're going to vote for the Democrats, and they're going to declare victory that their guy's now in power. Congratulations! In the name of preventing white supremacy, you got a rich white old guy in the White House. Good work.
Mm-hmm.
I will say, when it comes to this election, the one thing I do want to watch is Joe Biden and Donald Trump debate. That will be great for a laugh.
I've heard a rumor that they're not actually going to debate. They're going to do some kind of debate on election day.
Really?
But
I know Nancy Pelosi came out this week and urged Biden not to debate Trump.
I can see why, because that guy has dementia, clearly, and having him on a debate stage would be absolutely hilarious, especially considering his poll numbers go down every time he opens his mouth.
Yep.
I don't get me wrong, I want him to debate too, because that would just be outrageously hilarious.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, just think of all the blunders he's made. Like, were it not for the mainstream media actively trying to push Biden ahead, imagine. Like my favorite so far has probably been when he said, unlike the African American community, the Latino community is very diverse. And it's like, can you imagine if Donald Trump said something like that? What the mainstream media would be saying?
What my personal favorite Bidenism is when he said, if you're unsure about who you're voting for, you ain't black.
Exactly.
I love all the memes that came about that, where African Americans who vote for Joe Biden or who vote for Donald Trump, Joe Biden just seeks them out, puts their hand on their forehead, and then just sucks the melanin out of their bodies.
Yeah. No. My favorite Bidenism, my favorite one. Poor kids are just as smart as white kids.
I forgot. I keep forgetting about that. That's.
Oh my God.
That is phenomenal.
All right. Now, as an aside, and again, this is besides just the weekly news update stream. This is my 6,000 subscriber celebration stream, so I do want to talk about some non-serious fun stuff. But that brings me. Who here has seen the movie Gran Torino?
Oh.
With Clint Eastwood, he's like the old racist Korean War veteran who ends up
yeah, I did see that one.
Okay, yes. Like, Biden is essentially that guy, but not as BA.
Yeah.
He is just. I've been telling people, it's like, I'm not voting for anyone, but I'm silently rooting for Joe Biden, because imagine come February 2022, where he's asked to do the State of the Union address for an hour because it's tradition. Do you have any idea how freaking hilarious that would be?
I almost kind of wonder if Kamala Harris would be president by then, if they would actually declare Biden as incompetent and make her the president, though.
I've heard rumors that that's the plan all along. Mostly this is coming from like Gab and just general like alt-right sources who think that Joe Biden is either some variant of a puppet or someone who's going to be basically forced to resign or impeached immediately, so that their actual candidate, Harris, can become president by hook or by crook. I don't know how much stock I put into that, but...
Well, it's funny you should say alt-right, because another thing, and I tweeted about this several times. So Richard Spencer, the leader of the person who organized the original protests in Charlottesville, and the person who allegedly really coined the term alt-right and made it first splashed it across the media back in 2016 because he was a big Trump supporter. He has now come out and said he hates Trump. Trump didn't follow through on anything he wanted him to, and this week announced he is, quote, riding with Biden and Harris, and he's going to be publishing a detailed document about why the alt-right should support Biden for president. Of course, mainstream media has nothing to say about this. Back in 2016, they pointed to the fact that Richard Spencer supported Donald Trump. See, Donald Trump must be a fundamentally racist, horrible, white supremacist person if Richard Spencer is for him. Well, now, lo and behold, Richard Spencer, the great leader of the alt-right, is riding with Biden and Harris.
Never go full Hoppian.
Yeah, exactly.
But I'm actually not terribly surprised because people have been sending me stuff about how the alt-right and Richard Spencer in particular are slowly becoming, I don't know what the proper term is, but they've become increasingly sympathetic to radical Islam and collectivist philosophy in general. So I'm not terribly surprised that they would start to go in that direction.
Oh God, that's going to end well.
It's what they want is they perceive Islam to be on the winning side in the sense that they are more interested in spreading their culture around the world and dominating others, which, given that the alt-right is fundamentally a totalitarian philosophy, their metric by which they determine success is their ability to dominate others rather than, engage in win-win relationships that less savage people would prefer. So naturally, they're going to look to the most savage, barbaric philosophy that actually manages to spread itself around the world and think, hey, let's do that. Let's join up with these guys. Even though they know the...
Well, it's not surprising. I have in the past made a video about why the left loves Islam. The reason being, it's not real. You wouldn't think that people on the political left would be too down with Islam. I mean, under Sharia law, homosexuals are supposed to be executed by being thrown off buildings, and all other stuff that you'd think someone who is all gender inclusive and stuff you absolutely would not be down with Islam. However, the reason they get along so well is because Islam is a totalitarian religion. It advocates complete government control over the people, and thus they end up getting along quite well, since the end goal is complete totalitarian control over the people.
Well, they're like their fellow travelers. They both agree in one, totalitarianism, the win-lose relationship between the state and the people, and they desire to dominate their enemies. And two, they have very huge grudges against individualist ideas that have effectively stood in their way for a very long time. So, I mean, it makes sense that they would sign up with the religion that says that God is evil and wants you to suffer.
And isn't it interesting how historically that's how virtually, I wouldn't say every, but when you look at so many tyrants throughout history, how do they justify what they do? Because God himself has given them the mandate to do this.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I can see that. It makes sense from their perspective. Of course, they're just following what they're probably just looking at Romans 13 just as yes, if I'm a ruler, that means God chose me. Romans 13 is probably the greatest curse in all of Christianity, and it's so easy to misinterpret too. What he actually meant is that Christians shouldn't engage in civil insurrection because that's just going to cause problems, and that people should just agree with it, or not really agree with it, but just take power away from the state by voluntarily complying with the state. It's kind of difficult to explain, but it kind of makes sense. It's like it's a passive resistance sort of thing.
Sort of like agorism.
Yeah, kind of. But the basic idea is that, civil insurrection isn't terribly effective, which is also consistent when you consider Jesus and Barabbas being brought forward for the people to choose which one is going to be pardoned as part of Passover. And the people chose Barabbas, who, if you recall, was a murderer who would target Roman soldiers and kill them in the street.
Now, I do want to address Albedo's comment here. Wasn't the alt-right's point for existing is that collectivist brown people are taking over the West? Yes. Back in 2016, the primary narrative of the alt-right was that America is ceasing to be a white nation. There's a coordinated cultural attempt to take over the country. That's why Trump needs to. The reason they were pro-Trump is they were pro-build the wall on the southern border, and they constantly lectured about the importance of living in a society that's ethnically homogenous, how it is the responsibility of the state to force everyone to be ethnically homogenous. And in fact, I believe the country they pointed to as having the best model is Israel, yet simultaneously Jews are evil and Israel is one of the most evil countries on the planet. But they have exactly the ethno-state model we want.
I mean, I would think that considering what the alt-right says about other groups and their ability to control, I'm surprised that they're siding with Islam and not Judaism. I would think that they'd want to join the evil Jewish conspiracy.
Yes, well, as we can see with what's going on with the alt-right now, there never was a whole lot of consistency.
I mean, I know that unfortunately a lot of alt-right people have not gotten to contact me about how to join the Illuminati. So I can tell you that they're not really interested in doing that, even though, at least from my perspective, that would be the most logical place to go if they wanted to, get control and power in the West. So I figured like they're probably working their way up to the Jewish conspiracy, but we'll see where that goes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, on that note, we're getting close to the top of the hour, so this is usually where I would cut off the stream. However, I'll point out this is the celebrating 6,000 subscriber stream. So if anybody has anything, chill, non-serious they'd like to discuss, by all means, let's go ahead and do that.
Actually, I did want to mention this, and here's the thing. I know that you mentioned that you thought you might have had COVID earlier this week. So I mean, I'm not trying to scare anyone with the whole COVID thing, but I was planning on writing or starting on a new Wattpad book called COVID 20. And the basic premise of it is that in the year 2080, the zombie apocalypse has finally occurred. And what caused it was actually COVID-19. Now, how it caused this is that people that got COVID-19, it actually infected them, or it infected the reproductive systems. And thing about it is that they got it, and they probably, if they survived it, they probably lived normal lives. But then that carried on into their offspring, and then finally, when their grandchildren hit maturity or puberty, that's when it started taking over. That's when COVID-20, started turning people into those things. And so it takes place from the perspective of a survivor of that, who both sets of grandparents actually never caught even the smaller strains of COVID. And so he was actually immune, but he's trying to find other survivors. He's trying to make his way through. And so it's kind of like, I was going to try to make it like this kind of futuristic. It's futuristic, but it's still post-apocalyptic. And, but I mean, yeah, that is kind of the premise, is that we don't see the COVID zombies, but the future generation will. So I don't know. I was thinking of starting on that maybe. So look out for that. If you're following me on Wattpad.
Okay.
I've been thinking about making a video about, I don't know if anyone remembers my video from over a year ago about why the Galactic Empire from Star Wars was doomed to fail. And I gave an economic analysis about how they basically should have been completely annihilated by the runaway hyperinflation of not only their gigantic military and navy, but also the Death Star. The destruction of the Death Star would have basically been a death knell for the Galactic Empire, as I would imagine their creditors would have only been able to pay them on the assumption that the taxes that they hope to collect in the future due to the Death Star, basically making the Galactic Empire irreproachable, would have guaranteed their ability to pay it back, at least in some distant future. Basically, they were borrowing money on the taxes that was being guaranteed by the Death Star. In the absence of the Death Star, yeah, their credit score would have fallen significantly and they would have been screwed. They would not have been able to make a second Death Star at all. But I'm thinking about making another video, but this one about the Imperium of Man from Warhammer 40k, about how they were doomed to fail. And not just the extent to which they've been in a constant state of war on all fronts for 10,000 years, but also how, even at their very beginning, they were adopting a form of government that was hugely anachronistic to their technology level and time period, to say nothing of the fact that trade, communication, and other things would have basically made maintaining the empire, the Imperium of Man as it is, rather difficult to say the least, if not outright impossible. The fact that they lasted for 10 years, let alone 10,000 years, is nothing short of miracle and probably proof that the Emperor of Mankind is indeed a god.
That'd be fun.
Yeah, unfortunately, I know that I'd have to explain a lot of 40k concepts just to explain what things like tithing, the Adeptus Mechanicus, STCs, and other things that people who might not be familiar with the setting might not know. But in general, like, I think it'd be pretty fun just to explain, like, yeah, these guys are screwed. And not just because, like, even if, like, there were no orcs, no Eldar, no Tyranids, no Necrons, no none of that, they were still screwed.
Yeah. Actually, what I'm wondering about Warhammer 40k is, are they going to introduce another major human faction or another major human faction into it that is like super technologically advanced and is a match for the Imperium? That's what I'm wondering.
That seems insanely unlikely. The closest equivalent would be the Adeptus Mechanicus, which following the Horus Heresy basically got absorbed into the Imperium of Man and is now part of their organization. They are technologically advanced and have basically a monopoly on technology and technological production. Mm-hmm. And they enforce that very, very violently. But they do have, like, very advanced technology. Though keep in mind, like, their technology is very eclectic. Yeah. It ranges in quality from things that you and I would laugh at in terms of its primitivism to things that are just like, holy fuck, how do they do that?
Yeah.
They have a gun that can convert matter into antimatter.
Yeah. Exactly.
All right, there are a couple of comments I want to answer here in the chat. DJ Enigma asks, have you seen the movie V for Vendetta? Indeed. Remember the 5th of November.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Albedo asks, you heard Daisy Ridley was blacklisted from Hollywood because of her role in Star Wars? I saw there is a movie reviews channel. I saw in my feed this week, there was a video that said something to that effect. I did not watch it, so I don't know the full story. Either of you know what the full story is on that?
I have. This is actually the first I've heard of it, so no.
Yeah, no, I had no idea that happened.
Okay, I'll have to look that one up. JC Armitage asks, has anyone seen the crazy reactions to Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War? Yes, that is something I'm aware of. So for those who are not aware, I guess the trailer for the next Call of Duty Black Ops came out. It's called Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War. And the trailer features a scene where President Ronald Reagan is speaking to the main characters in the game and essentially telling them to do whatever they have to do to stop this Soviet spy or, you know, terrorist or whatever he is. And the allegation was that Ronald Reagan is telling them to commit war crimes in order to stop the Soviet Union, which made a ton of people mad. Now, I watched the trailer, and I feel like the people who are saying this are reading way too much into that. I honestly don't think Call of Duty is terribly political. They just want to make a game that people are going to buy, hence that they can make profit. But yes, apparently those that are more sympathetic to the Soviet Union were quite angry that Ronald Reagan was featured in that trailer.
Well, and here's the thing. I know I'm going to piss off a bunch of Reaganites that are watching this, but honestly, even Ronald Reagan saying things like that would not surprise me. He was still a U.S. president, and he was willing to do anything to get his agenda, passed. He was willing to do anything to get, to become a hero in the eyes of all Americans. You know, the hero president that stopped the Soviets. So I mean, honestly, you know, even that would not surprise me if he did something like that. So,
well, he did. He did quite a lot, actually.
Oh, wow.
I'm pretty sure the most classic example everyone can remember is Iran Contra. He was also the one that got started on the arming of the Mujahideen against the Soviet Union through the CIA. That was largely his program. He also did a whole bunch of other stuff, like supplying covert supplies and communications equipment to the what's it called, the Solidarnosc movement in Poland, which was currently under the Iron Curtain, if you recall, well as well as another thing I can't quite remember off the top of my head. Oh yeah, that's right. He was also having a gas pipeline from the Soviet Union that was being built into Europe being sabotaged.
Yeah, there you go.
So in terms of him being a criminal, I don't think that should be uncontroversial, but I know that there's going to be a lot of conservatards who are going to see their big daddy Reagan being slandered and just be like, oh, that's terrible. That's really bad. He can't be he's never done anything wrong. Ronald Reagan's a good boy. Even though, like, didn't he pass one of the strictest gun control measures in American history up to that point?
Oh yeah.
In 1985, I think it was, and 1984.
Mm-hmm.
And DJ Enigma asks, should libertarians be more religious in order to ethically advance their anarchistic ideals, or no? It's not necessary, I'll say that.
It could go either way, honestly.
First, you don't have to be religious to understand how principles and Aristotelian ethics. It certainly helps. It makes people more disposed to the idea of objective ethics, certainly. However, it's not necessary. I know a lot of deontologists and people who believe in Aristotelian ethics who are agnostic or atheist.
I personally would hold that Orthodox Judaism and Christianity are inherently libertarian, but I would hold that religions like Islam and most other religions throughout history are inherently authoritarian. But of course, it would take me a long time to explain each of those respectively. So,
yeah. Oh, and by the way, fun fact: the full auto ban during the Reagan administration supported by the NRA.
Yeah.
Yeah. Don't ever assume that those guys are going to be operating in your interest.
Oh yeah.
What a surprise!
Yeah, who'd have thought a mainstream organization being deceitful? Weird. Yep. Never seen that before.
Mm-hmm. You know, it was hilarious. I was actually I was arguing with a socialist on Facebook, and apparently there is like a socialist rifle association or something like that. It's basically affiliated with socialism that states kind of the same thing as the NRA, more or less. And I was literally saying to him, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if your organization exists. If you ever get a socialist into power, they will shill for that socialist so much as the NRA has. It was like, oh no, they won't. No, I doubt that. It's like, no, dude. Look at what's happening now with the NRA, and open your eyes. I mean, God.
Imagine if Trump was a socialist and the NRA was an openly socialist organization. Now imagine
they probably would go that way.
Imagine that everything that they've said about 3D printing, the banning of bump stocks, and how their language would be any different.
Right.
I will say, personally, one of the best slogans I've ever heard for a gun rights group, prior to the Obergefell Supreme Court decision that legalized same-sex marriage in America, there was a article about a number of fringe LGBTQXYZ groups, most of which I thought were pretty ridiculous, but one caught my eye. There was a group called Pink Pistols, and it was an LGBT gun rights group. And their tagline was "Pink Pistols, gays with guns don't get bullied." And I remember laughing hysterically, but I said, you know what? There are a lot of crazy LGBTQXYZ groups out there. They at least have a point.
Yeah.
Armed fags don't get bashed. It's very simple.
Our queers don't get smeared.
Either way, yeah, the idea is absolutely fantastic. And if they are good on that, then I see no reason to be very. I don't see a reason to be have any problem with that. At least not on principle. I'm sure that there's a lot of other stuff that they're like dumb on. And I know, for example, that Marxists are, or at least Karl Marx was good on gun rights, but only insofar as the proletariat would have the means to murder everybody.
Mm-hmm.
But anyways, I do got to get going now.
Okay.
Yeah, same here.
All right. Well, I guess at this point, we'll go ahead and cut off the stream then. If I do have more time later, we'll perhaps do another 6,000 part 2 of the celebration stream. But anyways, thanks everybody for being here. Again, thank you so much to all those of you who've helped me and my channel reach 6,000 subscribers. Love you guys, and hopefully I'll be keeping the good content coming up and keep the channel growing. Otherwise, I'll talk to you guys later. I'm sure there'll be plenty more to discuss next week. And as always, that is my 2 cents. Take it for what it's worth.
Bye.
Bye.